Welcome to another Whiteboard Wednesday. I'm David Sill, Head of Sales Enablement at Discover.org, and today we're going to be discussing emotional intelligence, and more specifically, 4 things that you can try to marshal your emotions towards greater sales success. For starters, let's talk about what emotional intelligence is. Popularized by author Daniel Goleman in his 1995 best-selling book by the same name, emotional intelligence is nothing more than our ability to recognize, understand, and control our own emotions, as well as to recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of the people that we deal with. And it plots this way. So in Goleman's rendering of emotional intelligence, you have both self-awareness and self-management, and then you also have relational awareness and relational management. And before we get started with some practical examples that you can apply in your selling efforts immediately, I want to talk about a tendency when emotions come up in a selling context. I think that most of us, our minds gravitate towards the negative possibility, which is to say, when I think about controlling emotions, I think about, hey, Dave, don't let your emotions get the best of you or you're going to lose the sale. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. All these sort of negative connotations of emotions in the context of selling. And I think it's really important to be mindful of the fact that there's a positive side to the ledger as well. So for instance, if I, as a salesperson, tell a really compelling story and I speak with terrific conviction in telling that story, that is a conscious intention on my part to marshal my emotions. But as you can see, it's a very positive version of emotional intelligence as opposed to where the mind gravitates. So always keep in mind that there's 2 sides to that coin, positive and negative, and you should be conscientious about both. So perhaps what would be a good exercise is if you drew this simple 4-box quadrant, you could, at any point in your selling life, you could have conscious intention to focus on this or that discipline. And if you read more of Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, and there's plenty out there to read, you'll see that there are disciplines that fall in each one of these quadrants. So I'm just going to give you 4, and I'm going to give you 4 ideas that you can apply in your selling. So one discipline under self-awareness is self-confidence. And one strategy that I find helpful in considering and intentionally marshaling your emotions as they relate to self-confidence is what I like to call change your what if. Let me explain. Most sellers that I have worked with, and including myself as a seller, I think there's this tendency to think of a sales cycle and you think of the prospect that you're trying to sell something to, and because you're always, as a salesperson, under pressure to hit your number and achieve your quota to help the team and to help your own paycheck, there's this knee-jerk tendency to think, well, what if I don't get this sale? What if this one falls out of my pipeline? I'll suggest to you that there's a much more positive way to harness self-confidence in a selling context, and that is to look at it from the opposite point of view. So instead of, what if I, as a seller, don't get this deal, I need to look at it as, what if my prospect doesn't get my product? Or what if my prospect doesn't get the benefit that my service provides? As soon as you start looking at it through that lens, it changes the negative of that emotion of self-confidence into a positive. And that's one example of how you could intend a better outcome by controlling your emotions. Another under self-management is the idea of empathy. And we know what empathy is. Empathy is really this idea of putting yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to look at the world from that perspective. And so I think there is a powerful idea that I know that I've used where I try to cast myself as the hero in the movie that I'm trying to imagine in my head. So what do I mean? I mean to say, okay, so let me use a Discover.org example. We worked with a particular client, and because of the quality and the accuracy of the data and the sales intelligence that we provided, the demand generation team at this particular client was able to take a very meaningful metric in their world and improve it 14 times over. And I think that if I am going about selling and telling that story, it would be easy for me to stop by saying, well, we took the marketing qualified leads and improved them by 14x the conversion of a marketing qualified lead over to a existing active opportunity in our sales funnel. Okay, great. That's good to tell the numerical part of the story. But when I say cast yourself as hero, what I mean is to say, how is a life changed by way of that 14x improvement? And so I want to continue along, and I want to be able to talk about how this 14x improvement was the most successful initiative that the demand generation team had all year. It was the most important, most impactful thing that they did as a team all year long. And as a result of that, people got bonuses. And as a result of that, who knows, maybe the team gets to be rewarded with a team building excursion together, and maybe that allows them to get to know each other as people. And there's this whole wonderful narrative that attends to, if you just put yourself in the shoes, using empathy, put yourself in the shoes of that hero and say, well, okay, there is this business outcome, and there's these numbers, these before and after statistics attached to that business outcome. But what about the narrative that also goes along with that? That's an important piece, and that's a great example of how, by casting yourself, you could really take your empathy in a selling situation to a higher level. Okay, so let's move over to the other side of the equation here. And so if I think about social awareness, one of the disciplines there is the idea of transparency. And by transparency, I mean to say that as a seller, you gain terrific credibility by just being just straight up and throw the cards on the table and whatever imagery you want to put there. But the idea of being transparent with the people that you're selling to is a key advantage. And under transparency as a discipline, I like to tell the people that I coach and am entrusted to lead to assert your rights. And this is kind of maybe a counterintuitive example, because in selling somebody something, I think the tendency is to always defer to the prospect's wishes, or the customer is always right. But it's important to remember that you're showing up at work each day, and you're doing a job, and your time is worth something too. And so it's very in fair play to ask the prospect, hey, what budget has been set aside for this? Or questions around what key stakeholders are going to be involved in this decision, and when can we get them into the next meeting? That might seem a bit pushy. It might seem a bit counterintuitive, but once again, I think that everybody that I deal with, to the extent that they are transparent with me, I have a lot of respect for that. And so I think that as a seller, if you assert your rights and you ask very straight questions about the buying process and the stakeholders involved and the budget and the timeline, I think that's an example of you bringing transparency to the table in a way that is going to positively help your credibility. And then lastly, if I think of the relational side of it, but managing the relational side of it, there is a discipline in Goleman's work called being a change catalyst. And being a change catalyst is exactly as it sounds. One technique that I like to teach in my coaching is to offer new possibilities. Once again, if I am taking into account how I might be able to marshal my emotions towards a more successful sales outcome, one of the things that I can do is cast new vision, cast new possibilities for the person that I'm speaking to, because most people that you bump into in a sales cycle, they're obviously going to be operating under whatever their status quo looks like today. And often the prize goes to the person that can offer them a new possibility. So once again, let me use a Discover.org example. In Discover.org's world, a lot of our buying marketplace is used to the fact that third-party data is typically unreliable, it's typically inaccurate, it's outdated, and sometimes it's even a complete waste of money. And so that's the status quo thinking that attends to most of the sales cycles that we find ourselves in. And so it's imperative as sellers that we cast a new possibility and that we say to the people that we're trying to sell them Discover.org that, hey, it doesn't have to be that way. There is another possibility, and let me show you what that is. What if, your seller, instead of scrambling around all day trying to kind of find the phone number that they need or figure out who's responsible for this area of the business, what if they just had that at their fingertips? What if instead of that taking an hour of their time and frustrating them and killing their morale, what if they had instant access to what they needed so they could commence with the selling and not have to spend so much time fledgling around with the prospecting? So that's another example of kind of the managing of the relational side of emotions. So there's much more to say here, but in the end, one emotion that is not your friend as a seller is worrying. Worrying never buys you anything. And so rather than spend time worrying, I would suggest that you spend time controlling the things that you can control. And by using a very simple 4-quadrant grid and some of these findings on emotional intelligence, you too can harness this to a greater end for yourself. So this has been Whiteboard Wednesday. We ask you to subscribe to our channel and offer any commentary if you like, and I hope you got some value out of this. Have a good day.